What are common misconceptions about Bloody Sunday?
Okay, the first one that springs to mind is you'd often hear it said that it's Michael Collins' squad that carried out the assassinations on Bloody Sunday morning. That wasn't the case. For starters, it was a Dublin Brigade squad.
There's the common misconception of it is really there's a couple. There's the one that Michael Collins organised the whole thing. He was definitely involved in the organisation of it, but you've got other people in there like Sean Russell, Dick McKee, and it's really, when you look into it, it seems to come down to between Dick McKee and Frank Thornton. They put all the files together and presented them to the Army Council for approval.
Another common misconception is that they wiped out British intelligence. They didn't. They dealt with it as a very severe body blow, but you'll often hear the cliche. Frank Thornton even says in his witness statement that that was pretty much the end of it. But no, not at all. They were like a boxer. They took a 5 count, but they were quickly back up on their feet again. You'd hear it said in certain quarters about the morality of quote unquote shooting people in their pajamas. Not a nice thing to be doing. That's certainly not conventional warfare.
But also, it did knock the wind out of the British intelligence for a while, because pretty soon they were back up. And what they brought in were much tougher, stronger agents. And one of the first things that they did was they cleared nearly all of the civilian personnel out of anything that they would be involved in. They sort of walked straight and went, you go, you're gone. So they handled their own paperwork after that, because we got Lily Merlin, who was able to give out some of the addresses and stuff.
But it has to be borne in mind that British, shortly before Bloody Sunday, had shot Lynch in the hotel in Parliament Street. They'd also shot O'Carroll up in Manor Street, both of whom were in their pyjamas. They set the precedent in that regard shortly before. With Peter O'Carroll, the same thing. There was a British group of assassins there under the command of Captain Hardy, who called to his premises there in October. And I think it was shortly after midnight, they got him downstairs, roused him out of bed. He was in a flat above his, I think it was a hardware shop, brought him down into the shop and shot him in the head while his wife and his kids, or his child, was upstairs. It was Sinn Féin councillor John Lynch. Lynch was staying in the Royal Exchange Hotel in Parliament Street, which is adjacent to Dublin Castle. And in the early hours of, I think it was the 23rd of September, there was several British agents came to the premises with the intention of killing him. 2 of them got into the hotel bedroom, but it was Henry Anglis and Captain Henry Anglis and Lieutenant Charles Peel. They shot him in his hotel room. They roused him from his bed and shot him.
David Nelligan was the spy in Dublin Castle for Michael Collins, and he informed that Captain Geoffrey Thomas Bagley had phoned Dublin Castle telling of Lynch's presence at the Exchange Hotel. 12 khaki-clad men were involved in the murder of Lynch. Inside information was received from Lieutenant G, aka Lily Merlin, who was a typist at British Army headquarters in Dublin Castle. Her information suggested it was Anglis and Peel. She'd been passing on information to Michael Collins' intelligence team for a while, and she'd overheard a co-worker, Lil Dunn, discuss the goings-on at 22 Lower Mount Street. Lieutenant G, Lily Merlin, reported all this information back to Michael Collins. It was after this Michael Collins approved an assassination attempt on Anglis and Peel. But what are the key events in the lead up to Bloody Sunday?
It was like how many months, like 9 months or something before, in December, was the ambush of Lord French at Ashtown Cross. You see, what happened there was because they didn't have any pre-warning of that attack, they reinvigorated their intelligence department. You've also got like Kevin Barry, you've got Terence McSweeney, you've got Thomas McCurtain. This is what we seen as the first big major strike back against them.
Sean Tracy was a huge trigger. When he was killed, there was a meeting that night up in Julia O'Donovan's house up in Airfield Road in Rathgar. But I don't think you'd have to really be a genius to figure out that plans to hit back were accelerated.
Sean Tracy's death sort of showed that there was touts and there was spies and they were on the streets.
Yeah.
I think basically it was inevitable that it was going to happen. Something had to be struck against the intelligence department because they were gaining ground and they were starting to win that sort of thing. And they did have touts everywhere.
General Macready had even said in September 1920, while British authorities were kind of congratulating themselves for finally getting the IRA on the back foot, he wrote a memo hastily to say that we want to be careful here because the IRA, I'm sure, has plenty of sting left in its tail, and he was ultimately proved right. In autumn of 1920, the IRA were on the back foot in Dublin. The streets were being patrolled by touts, armed touts acting on behalf of British intelligence. Auxiliaries were going around very arrogantly patrolling. What Mark Sturgis in Dublin Castle wrote in his diary on Armistice Day for Bloody Sunday, where he talks about Dame Street in Dublin looked as British as Bond Street. There was that many Union Jack flags flying around, apart from the tricolour that was flying over City Hall.
On Friday, 19th of November, numerous raids in the IRA had occurred. 200 volunteers were being searched for, with homes raided. Mark Sturgis said that, "Raiding tonight for these beauties, and we'll have them on the run anyway if they have taken flight and bolted."
There's one part that he noted where there was a protest going on outside. There was celebration going on in the city because it was Armistice Day, but there was a bunch of separatist protesters that were down outside what is today, what was then as well, the Bank of Ireland and College Green, protesting about the Union Jack that was flying there. And they were quickly, as far as Mark Sturgis was concerned, there was a passing patrol of auxiliaries pulled up very, very quickly, put manners on them, stood to attention beside what was then the William of Orange statue, which was there in College Green. And that was pretty much the only incident that day. Everything else, as far as he was concerned, seems to reflect that Dublin was getting back to business as usual. Arthur Griffith had recently asked for the hunger strikes down in Cork to cease. There was just a sentiment that the IRA was pretty much done. Famously, the American consul in Dublin, Frederick Dumont, he wrote a memo to say that the IRA was all but defeated in early November 1920, and he was almost killed himself on Bloody Sunday. He came very close.
There is no such thing as the Cairo Gang, okay? They reckon the first time it was ever used was in the 50s, the Cairo Gang. And it's sort of stuck from there, and then everyone started to use it because there was the Cairo Cafe, so probably a lot of them did their teas and all in there. But no, there is no Cairo Gang. See the picture and they say the Cairo Gang. That's actually F Company of auxiliaries.
Why did Bloody Sunday have to happen?
Dublin was being flooded with British agents.
Yeah.
And they were starting the tentacles were all over. They were just starting to permeate throughout Dublin. The IRA needed to hit back, and they needed to be seen to be hitting back. To retake the initiative from the British. The British clearly had the initiative throughout the early autumn of 1920. On that, I mean, Dick McKee, when he was kind of marshalling, the troops, so to speak, the night before, he put it to them that, look, they're closing in. If we don't do this, because, he was addressing them from the perspective of, a lot of you guys haven't done this before.
Yeah.
Again, testifies to the fact that it wasn't the squad. This was Dublin Brigade. This was fellas, although the squad did participate. But it was the vast majority was just Dublin Brigade volunteers. And McKee had to explain to them, a lot of them who were very, very uneasy the night before, that if we don't do this, this is down to the wire. If we don't get them, they are going to get us. And I mean, events proved McKee right, because I mean he was taken that night.
So it was the right idea was to swoop all at once. Then there can be no warnings to each other. and none of them can get away.
Yeah, so this rather dilapidated looking building here is number 100 Seville Place, and prior to having their headquarters down at Moorlands in Abbey Street, this was the headquarters of none other than the Squad.
So this is the first place they had headquarters.
This was their first headquarters.
While they were prepping the troops, one of the buildings that they were going to marshal in the night before was number 100 Seville Place. That was raided by auxiliaries. The building was ransacked. Then you had a raid went on up in Vaughn's hotel. You had McKee and Clancy getting lifted that night. So I mean, the writing was on the wall. The British were closing in.
Where would have Collins been the night before?
He was up in Vaughn's, but he was also down at the pep talk as well. Collins, I mean, he was involved. You know, you can't take that away. But it's just, again, you know, the cliche of Michael Collins' Squad, you know, doing all the work. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
Collins was on the Army Council. So was McKee. McKee the job. Sean Russell was given the job in tandem with McKee as a second in command in terms of the tactical organisation of it. But Collins was there as well. It was in the Typographical Institute in 35 Lower Gardner Street. Very innocuous looking building that you pass by. You know, people would pass by every day with no idea of just what was plotted in there. But Collins was down, and he gave them the famous pep talk about, you know, you need to be there at 9 a.m. The Brits need to know that we can, you know, that we can coordinate something and that we can turn up on time. Afterwards, there was a meeting up in Vaughn's hotel. McKee, Clancy, and others they attended it as well. And Vaughn's was raided that night. Collins escaped by the skin of his teeth, as did McKee and Clancy, albeit only temporarily in their case. And of course, Clune was captured.
In terms of the plans for Bloody Sunday, who was Michael Collins' intelligence for the event?
You had the Crow Street Three, as they were called. You've got Liam Tobin, Frank Thornton, and Tom Cullen. But you've got every sort of hit had an intelligence officer.
These guys were based out of number 3 Crow Street.
Liam Tobin was Deputy Director of Intelligence.
Tom Cullen was the Assistant Director, and Frank Thornton was the Deputy Assistant Director. But for Bloody Sunday, now this was in the normal course of business. Yeah. They were operating out of number 3 Crow Street. But in terms of the planning for Bloody Sunday, Frank Thornton was kind of he was more or less given charge of identifying the agents, along with Lily Mernon and of course others as well. But Thornton assumed an office in what was then the Antient Concert Rooms in Great Brunswick Street, what today is Pearse Street. Today it's the Institute of Chartered Accountants on Pearse Street. So he assumed an office in there, and he basically collated the information that was given to him with from the likes of several sources, including Lily Mernon and others. He came up with dossiers on 60 British agents, or 60 suspected British agents, and this was where the list came from.
So between McKee and Thornton, they built a list of 60. They were called the particular ones. But what would happen was, as new information came in, the number changed. This kept going down, or others were added. Eventually, they went to the Army Council, Dick McKee and Frank Thornton, with a list of 45. Cathal Brewer, who they initially seen, went through the files, and he recommended that 15 were struck out just through lack of evidence as such. And then the Army Council agreed with that. So then you had 30 individuals.
Now that list was then given to Dick McKee. McKee and Thornton went over the list before they then handed it on to the Army Council, which McKee himself was a member of. Between McKee, between Thornton, between Brewer, and between the Army Council, which of course included Collins, they decided on 30 definitive names that were to be marked out for execution on Bloody Sunday.
Yes, Collins, did, he collected information on these people. He knew so many people. He was working as intelligence, but he was doing so much. He gets Thornton to start building the files on the people. Dick McKee is helping him build files because the Dublin Brigade are also bringing in files, saying, right, so they're building up. What have you got on him? What have you got on him? Like, so they build these files, but Collins will be bringing in intelligence from the porters.
IRA intelligence, it was something that punched way beyond its weight in terms of what they were up against. You know, people who worked in train stations, people who worked in bars, hotels, people who worked in shops, newspapers, anywhere. People who worked in bars, in brothels, in hospitals, everywhere. They had information coming in from everywhere. And Grove Street is a fascinating sort of a place where you're looking at people who were going there looking like businessmen, bringing in briefcases, dressed in smart suits, and going in, you know, operating during business hours and creating and profiling, making profiles, using little stuff like the Westminster Gazette or Society magazines, which would, you know, they might say somebody was being sent for, you know, special duties or something along those lines, which to them would indicate that they were being sent over to do intelligence work in Ireland. They might find something about somebody who was getting married or whose relative was getting married, that some officer might be attending a function in County Roscommon or Galway or Cork or whatever, and they get billed. They just built profiles on people, and they did it incredibly well. Yeah, well, you see, you also had intelligence officers throughout the brigade as well. You know, each company in the Dublin Brigade battalions had its own intelligence officer. Each battalion would have had its intelligence officer as well, and they all would have been feeding up to their commandants as well. So it wasn't just GHQ intelligence. Intelligence was run all over the place. How she kept a poker face doing what she had to do. Before strolling out to number 118 Clonleaf Road, which kind of feeds into the Bloody Sunday narrative as well.
But she used to enter the house through the latch used to be left off on the side gate. She would go in there at a time when she knew that there was nobody else in the house. When she got inside, she would reproduce the message. There was a typewriter in there, and she'd type out the message, she'd put it in a little envelope, and she'd leave it in a specific part of the house where somebody else, after she had left, so she'd never meet them, they would come along and they would get the information about who was living where.
Lily Mernon, I mean, her input was pivotal towards Bloody Sunday.
21-year-old Molly O'Reilly worked in the United Services Club in St. Stephen's Green. Her job was a waitress, and she had endeared herself to military clientele for duplicitous reasons. What were the British trying to do at the time with their authority?
You had another triumvirate at Dublin Castle in the form of Andy Cope, Mark Sturgis and Sir John Anderson. Their remit was to dangle the carrot, so to speak, for Sinn Féin, while the auxiliaries and Black and Tans were the stick. With Hamer Greenwood, you could say, the Undersecretary, the Chief Secretary for Ireland, you know, waved the stick. The strategy of what was going on, you know, Bloody Sunday. I mean, the British, as you said, the authorities, what were they looking to do? They were looking to talk to Sinn Féin, to execute their exit strategy that would leave them losing as little face as possible. They wanted peace in Ireland. They had a Washington Naval Conference coming up the following year. They had a US election, the presidential election. Irish America was critically important at that time to them. They wanted to get out of Ireland in a way that would make them look good in the eyes of the world, and particularly in the eyes of the Americans and in the eyes of their own empire. The IRA saw things differently, so therefore what they wanted to do was, you know, I mentioned the carrot and the stick. So, you know, they had those guys there that were dangling the carrots, but the stick was actually working quite well as far as the British were concerned in autumn 1920. And that's why you had Lloyd George famously saying that we had murder by the throat.
I was kind of reading Ernie O'Malley's on Another Man's Wound, just a little bit of it, just to see what he said about Bloody Sunday. He didn't know anything about it, and I was wondering if everyone in the IRA knew about this operation, or was it very close?
Oh no, this is absolutely secret. Participants were only told about it the night before.
It was kept to whoever needed to know. They would say anyone who didn't need to know didn't know.
Like one of the things that was pivotal about, as Collins mentioned as well, about the 9 a.m. You know, that's one part of it. Everybody would be getting done at the one time, but more importantly, was getting everybody on the same morning. Yeah. This was Dick McKee articulated. You know, if they couldn't get them all on the same morning or at the same sort of time, you know, they might have had to spread it out over a few days. But any sort of escalation on their part would have very, very quickly lead to their targets retreating inside to the bastion that was Dublin Castle at the time, and from there they would have been untouchable. This was the fear, and this is what Dick McKee instilled into the operatives the night before, so that we need to get these guys now, otherwise they're going to be safe and sound, and they're going to be coming after us from a vantage point that suits them.
How important were Dick McKee and Sean Russell to Bloody Sunday operations?
Well, they were the tactical organisers of it. The misconception is that, you know, it was Michael Collins' squad that went out and did Bloody Sunday. It's completely incorrect. McKee was given charge of the operation by the Army Council, of which again he was the member, and Sean Russell was ordered to act alongside him. Sean Russell was the commandant of the 2nd Battalion at that time.
Between him and Dick McKee, they chose the men. They chose the men most suitable for it.
2nd Battalion, I always do like to add as well that they may have had a quiet Easter Rising. A lot of them would say they were holed up in Jacob's Biscuit Factory, but they certainly made up for that, because as far as I'm concerned, they were the tip of the spear, at least in Dublin during the War of Independence. They planned it and they orchestrated it. They selected the buildings where everybody was going to be, and they coordinated pretty much everything. Now, I mean, everything which includes having to organise boats to ferry the 2nd Battalion members back across the river, because they knew that there was a lot less bridges in Dublin at that time, particularly between the areas of what is today the business district of Dublin 2 back over to the docks or whatever. You know, the nearest bridge to that was the one that was adjacent to the Custom House, Tara Street. So they suspected that was going to be blocked off. So egress had to be arranged via boats to get them across the Liffey. All sorts of other transportation contingencies. First aid stations had to be set up. Transportation for wounded. You can just imagine what's going into this.
Sean Russell and Dick McKee also had dealings with car drivers and where intelligence officers were to deliver captured enemy files.
Coming the Mon members who are going to be available to rendezvous with volunteers who are carrying weapons, that they can quickly give the weapons to the Coming the Mon members who get them off, who smuggle them off, so stash them in city tenements or city buildings or whatever. You're talking about a massive logistical enterprise. The traumatic aspects of it to the British is that they didn't even have an inkling of what was about to happen.
Vinnie Byrne was ordered to take an elderly volunteer first aider with him. They went to the squad dump at Jackie Dunn's Denzil Lane for first aid kits. Dunn rummaged round and came back with a .38 revolver. "Will this be of any use to you?" Byrne gave it to the first aider. The message was clear. "Can you take me through the raid on Vaughn's hotel?"
There was a GHQ meeting going on in Vaughn's hotel in what's today Parnell Square, number 29. I think there was a smoking room up on one of the top floors. Collins was there, McKee was there, Clancy was there, Beasley was there. There was a couple of others there. Conor Clune was there. A guest there who wasn't known to Christy Hart. He was the hotel porter, and he had a very sort of a keen eye, sort of a sixth sense, a great way of picking up if something didn't seem right. And this guy was seen making a sort of a surreptitious phone call, then hanging up, then leaving the premises. So that kind of raised Christy Hart's antenna. So he went up to the smoking room and said, "Lads, I think there's going to be a raid."
Cathal Brugha and Richard Mulcahy had gone to a small cottage around the grounds of the Children's Hospital at Temple Street.
Pierce Beasley, Conor Clune, and there was I think he was a clerk from Kingsbridge, which is today Houston Station. They'd gone down to the hotel pantry, so they missed out on his warning. Okay. Collins left, as did Clancy and McKee.
Michael Collins, Gearóid O'Sullivan, Dermot O'Hegarty and Rory O'Connor had managed to slip away to a top floor flat where he watched the raid take place. Conor Clune was the head of Raheen Rural Industries in Clare, and he was up with his boss for the annual audit. Clune had no idea about Sunday's operations.
When the auxiliaries came in, they were under the command of Captain Hardy, the notorious Hopper Hardy. Beasley and O'Connell, they escaped out the back, but Conor Clune didn't run. He assumed, well, he was a civilian, he was up on civilian business. But he was questioned by Hopper Hardy, and he found his notebook with the name Tracy written in it. So he suspected that was Sean Tracy, and he noticed that Conor Clune didn't have a toothbrush on him. So he suspected that he wasn't staying the night, and they arrested him in that regard, and that ultimately sealed Clune's fate.
Could you tell me how Clancy and McKee were arrested?
So after they'd left Vaughn's, Clancy and McKee cycled back to number 36 Lower Gloucester Street, today Sean McDermott Street. That was the home of Sean Fitzpatrick. They were hiding out there. But McKee, he arrived after Clancy, but he was followed by a man named John Ryan, nicknamed John Shankers Ryan. Ryan watched McKee going into the house, and he came along with afterwards, and he tied a piece of paper with a string to the house's doorknob. This was to act as a marker for the auxiliaries that he was about to ring.
The Dublin Castle spy, John Ryan, was watching Sean Fitzpatrick's house. What he didn't know was that the head nun in the convent was watching him and tipped off Sean Fitzpatrick.
So they started to burn paperwork, particularly the list for the following morning's assassinations. Then eventually there was a knock on the front door. Sean Fitzpatrick went to answer it. He made sure nobody could get in the front. Then all hell broke loose.
I knew met Dick McGee several times as a kid. He used to sit on his knee as a kid. But Pat Clancy was a newcomer then. But I tell you who I met and shook hands with Sean Russell. My father was in the 2nd Battalion IRA. He was an intelligence officer. I remember jumping around inside the house. I think the key was staying, and he slept in the front room. That was that front room. We turned it into a bedroom for him. He slept in there, and this time when Clancy came, they had to make room for him. So my father was looked on as the landlord. Florrie was my father's adopted sister then, and she when she heard the noise, they jumped at hands over the railings down the area. They burst the door in because they couldn't get in the hall door because, as a matter of fact, they shut the lock out of the hall door. But there was a chain on it. I remember the big heavy chain going across, and they couldn't get through. Me pulling down the house to get through. So that held them up there. So they jumped the area, and my sister said, "Stop! I was trying to get my clothes on. Will you give me time to dress?" You see. And in the meantime, word came down from the city that they were burning papers, and which they burned all the papers they had, and then everything was gone. They cut in, and then they rushed up the stairs and they cut in. They had a tank out, like an armour car outside, and the lights were trained on the roof in case they got away through those, which they could have.
The information that they had was the list for the following morning.
Yeah.
Quite sure the prey was inside, you know. So they got them and they brought them to the key to the castle then. And as a matter of fact, there was a big roundup then because there seemed to be a lot of people across, and they're all in the castle and all lining up there, and identified him, then pull him out, you know, just like that. By a fellow in cities where he had a cane and a limp. And the same fellow was in the house. My father said he had a limp as well. And he pulled out the different people.
Because I know Clancy nearly got out, didn't he? He was in the line to leave. Because they were shipping them off to Arbor Hill. And Hoppy Hardy came along. And he shone a torch into Clancy's face. And he goes, "You're not going anywhere, you bastard," back in that room. And Fitzpatrick then was taken out of the room. And he joined the queue. And he was taken away. As to what McKee and Clancy and Clune went through, I'm sure they got beatings.
You're talking potentially catastrophic. Had they talked, because the British had no inkling of what was going to happen. As you know, they as far as they were concerned, they had the IRA all but beaten. Kevin O'Higgins wrote afterwards. He wrote to his fiancée saying that some of the stuff that's after happening here, fellas won't be able to go out on operations again, and he was right. This wasn't something that rubbed, a lot of the IRA volunteers up, the right way, going up to fellas up in bedrooms and blowing their heads off in front of their wives, and in the case of 117 Moorhampton Road, their children. K Company 3rd Battalion under Captain Lawrence Nugent.
There was about 20 men from K Company turned up. Percival Smith, he's a 10-year-old boy, answered the door.
And it was 10 volunteers. There was 20 volunteers in that operation, 10 waited outside. The other 10 basically stormed into the house, got 3 enemy suspects, got them into the front room in the house. There was also a smaller child screaming in the house that had to be tended to by his mother.
They get Thomas Smith. So they go into McLean's bedroom, and he's in bed with his wife, and he asks not to be shot in front of his wife. I think he knows this is it, it's over. So he's taken out. And then John Caldo he's also found. Now he come to Ireland to join the auxiliaries.
And then these 3 enemy suspects were shot, 2 of them were killed.
Lieutenant McLean had recently been arrested as a spy in Clare by the IRA. He had been released on the condition that he returned to Scotland. He never went. He had asked not to be shot in front of his wife Kate. McLean was dragged from the bedroom into his spare room. There were 8 shots. The
landlord was Thomas Smith, but he was there was evidence against him being a Dublin Castle informer.
Yeah, the 3 men that they shot in the house were Thomas Smith. He was the householder, he was the landlord, but he was also a Dublin Castle informer. He also had, ostensibly he was with the Rifle Brigade, but he was a senior intelligence officer. He was Lieutenant Donald McLean. And you also had McLean's brother-in-law, who was a Scotsman named John Caldo, and he was formerly of the Royal Scots Fusiliers. He'd only recently arrived in Ireland to join the auxiliaries. So in 117 Moorhampton Road, all of those who were shot were what would be considered to be legitimate targets.
John Caldo survives it. He's the only one that's left alive. But Caldo calls out for his sister to help, to come and get the doctor. She goes in and sees her husband. Just 3 shot up men lying on the floor.
3 of K Company never returned to duty after this incident. '92 Lower Bagot Street. Squad members Joe Leonard and Bill Stapleton arrived with a unit of 10 men. Joe Leonard in his witness statement recalls that the housekeeper silently pointed out where the officers' quarters were. Both Joe Leonard and Bill Stapleton tried to knock on the door to his parlour. They tried to open a back parlour door. Newbury opened this slightly. He tried to slam it shut, but attempting to escape out the window. Leonard and Stapleton shot Newbury numerous times, as one of the members from the assassination unit also fired in. Bill Stapleton recalls Newbury's wife being hysterical and screaming. A few days later, she would give birth to a stillborn baby. She herself died a few days after that. 7 Ranelagh Road. 4th Battalion unit of Todd Andrews' target was Lieutenant William Noble of the Dublin District Special Branch.
Yeah, number 7 Ranelagh Road. Dolan was an intelligence officer, himself and Dan MacDonald. They were acting alongside 4th Battalion. The guy that they were going after there, number 7 Ranelagh Road, was Lieutenant William Noble. He was a 28-year-old intelligence officer with the Sherwood Foresters Regiment. He was there with his Irish mistress. Okay. When they got in, the 4th Battalion, it was a personal thing with them because Nobel was suspected of having fed information that had led to the death of Sean Doyle in the Dublin mountains in September. Now, Sean Doyle was the son of Padder Doyle. His son Sean was the first IRA man to be killed by the auxiliaries in Dublin. But William Noble was suspected as being the intelligence officer who had led them to that IRA unit on that morning. So for 4th Battalion, this was somewhat personal.
The officer in charge is Francis Xavier Coughlin.
Todd Andrews was assigned as one of the gunmen for that operation. Kind of comical in a way. Andrews was suffering from concussion from a football match the day before. He wasn't feeling too good about the job, having to shoot somebody up close, particularly with the after effects of a concussion. But he very nearly shot an innocent man. He busted into the bathroom, and there was a fella standing there having a shave, and he actually levelled his pistol to shoot, only to be approached immediately afterwards by it was either Joe Dolan or Dan MacDonald saying, "Listen, that's not the guy we're after."
When they get there, his mistress is in bed, and Dolan basically loses the head.
They went into the bedroom, expecting to find Lieutenant Noble there, but he wasn't there. His mistress was there, so they started interrogating her.
I think it was more Dolan than MacDonald. Dolan lost the head, and he was screaming for where Noble was, and he was out on a raid.
As to where Lieutenant Noble was, and obviously she didn't comply. So Joe Dolan actually he removed. There was a sword in a scabbard on the wall, an ornamental sword and scabbard. So
off the wall, the scabbard. He started beating her with it, and then he started to set the house on fire.
But they were walking around the house, guns in hand. There was women and children in the house, and they were just looking for this guy to kill him. When they couldn't find him, they set the bedroom on fire. The Dolan, I think, stole a ring from Lieutenant Noble's mistress. Information could be got that somebody had a signet ring that he wore on a particular finger or something like that.
Coughlin came in, accused that, said to them, "You're worse than the Black and Tans," and told them to get the hell out of the house. And then he and his men, even though they should be getting the hell out of there, had to form, because there was other women and children in the house, and they had to form like a fire chain from the cellar upwards to put the fire out.
Did any other attacks go wrong, or maybe faulty intelligence?
No battle plan survives contact with the enemy.
We've got ones where they've told East Wall, was it? There was one.
Yeah.
Church Street out that way, sort of. They went in, nobody there. You're going to have that all over the place. They're going to turn up like Tiny King, Hardy, I think, were on the list. They were not there when they went.
In Fitzwilliam Square, they got into a building there looking for a guy who wasn't there. They went to East Wall to get somebody over there. Wasn't there. There was plenty went wrong. Inevitably, on an operation like that, something is going to go wrong. It always does.
IRA unit, including Patrick Moran of D Company 2nd Battalion, moved into the reception area of the Gresham Hotel.
McCormick had come back from Egypt, he was part of the Alexander Turf Club. So he'd been over sort of buying horses, and he was supposed to be moving back, I think it was about a month later. Controversy seems to come more afterwards when his mother, because his family were from Dublin, I think his mother lived in Dublin, she wrote to Michael Collins trying to get his name cleared, and then Collins sort of passed it over to Mulcahy, saying this was Dublin Brigades, one of the Dublin Brigades additions to the list.
McCormick had been a cousin of the Land League founder Michael Davitt. The assassination parties passed the first floor corridor. Unexpectedly, the door to room number 12 opened from the inside. Lieutenant Wilde had stood in the doorway. He was tanned. Cahill pointed his pistol in his face and demanded his name. He got a very honest reply. Wilde, British intelligence, just back from Spain. Wilde had mistaken the gunmen for an undercover British military unit, but he had just sealed his own fate. 3 muffled pistol cracks finished him off. Outside room 22, the door was unlocked. Cahill had turned the doorknob slowly. McCormick had been sitting in bed, reading the Irish Field newspaper, eating his breakfast. Cahill and Nick Leonard fired guns as soon as they went in. McCormick had been shot through the head, the wrist, the neck and the groin. He died instantly.
And there was so much went wrong on that day. If you were to look at, there was the hotel, the Eastwood Hotel down in Leeson Street. The target wasn't there that day.
A 10-man unit under Captain Christy Byrne had arrived to assassinate Lieutenant Colonel Jennings. Christopher Byrne mentions in his witness statement that 2 men were sent to cover the back while he led the main unit inside. He had asked for Jennings' room number from the receptionist and cut telephone wires. Jennings had not checked in that night. They withdrew as there were no instructions given to them to do anything else.
I don't think the intelligence was faulty. I think the intelligence was right in where they were supposed to be there. They just weren't there. The one I know about was the University Church. They were there and then they would collect the guns and take the guns away.
Okay.
So it was, because you see, it was sort of timed that for 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Mass, isn't it? So it wouldn't be any problem for anyone to be hanging around outside the church.
Annie Cooney has said in her witness statement, on the Saturday night before Bloody Sunday, about 11:30, we were approached by Christy Byrne, who was OC of the F Company of the 4th Battalion. He told us we were wanted to be ready at 6 o'clock the next morning, as there was a big job on, and they wanted the 3 of us to be at the University Church at 9 o'clock and to wait there till he and the 2 others, namely the 1st and 2nd lieutenants of that company, James Donnelly and Eddie Bennett, would arrive and hand over their guns to us. We were at the church at the appointed time, and to avoid attracting attention, we went into the church in turns, 2 at a time, and attended Mass, while the 3rd remained in the porch and watched. As the operations were in progress in that area, and after waiting during what seemed to us an eternity, the 3 fellows came along, walking pretty smartly, and handed over their guns to us, 1 each, in the laneway between the church and Harcourt Street corner.
Captain Fitzgerald was unlucky. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
When they knocked on the door, they asked for a Mr. Clement Fitzpatrick.
There was a servant there by the name of Kathleen Hay. She opened the door saying that there was nobody there by that name. But then she turned around and she says, "Well, there is actually a Captain Fitzgerald staying here," and that sealed his fate.
So they presumed it must be the same man.
Fitzgerald, he was 22 years old. He was an RIC acting barrack sergeant. He was a former soldier from Tipperary. He was actually convalescing in the place. But he had been apprehended by the Clare IRA, and he'd been wounded in his own botched execution. He subsequently fled from there to get medical treatment before eventually travelling and recuperate in Dublin, which turned out to be an unfortunate move. He would now die simply because of his name's similarity to the IRA's intended target. His killing was quite gruesome, because there were Lieutenant Byrne, who was in charge of that particular operation. He summoned 5 men to follow him inside. He and 3 others, with their weapons ready, followed. They went upstairs. Generally speaking, you're talking, good 45 caliber pistols.
And then he sort of opens his eyes to find 3 revolvers pointing at him, and thus ended his life, basically.
So you're talking about, there was 2 bullets went through his forehead, so you can imagine the mess that's going to be left behind him in terms of his brains, his skull, and his blood, exploding from his parietal bone out the back of his head. Another one struck him through the heart and exited out the back. So the entire scene was completely bespattered. But this was only the start of what was happening that day. It was going on everywhere. But another bullet shattered his wrist. A horrific sight for any onlooker, including those who were carrying out the killing. But the killings in this particular case, they nonchalantly walked away. They went back downstairs and just strolled away from the premises. Bennett and Ames, they had revealed to IRA intelligence who were drinking with them. This is one of the fascinating aspects to the whole intelligence war, was the likes of Frank Thornton, Tom Cullen, Liam Tobin, Frank Sauron and others who were, they'd visited the same places as these guys, the Cairo Cafe, Kids Back Pub, Rabiati's. There was a host of places where they would mingle and they would drink.
Okay, we're now standing outside what was the notorious Cairo Cafe on Grafton Street, where a lot of the British intelligence agents just hung around. It was where they coalesced, but it was also where Collins's intelligence men went in to actually meet these guys.
But they'd literally go drinking with these guys, but I think it was Bennett and Ames who, while they were drinking with them, revealed that they knew the names of Tobin, Cullen and Thornton. At the point, I think it was Thornton who famously said when he heard that he thought the ground was about to open up and swallow him.
Squad member Vinnie Byrne's unit met up at Westland Row at 8 a.m. 5 men were stationed outside the house.
38 Upper Mount Street, that was E Company from the 2nd Battalion. Vinnie Byrne, who was a squad member, was in command.
These are like little sub-intelligence places, yeah?
Yeah.
So Cairo was supposed to be there as well, but he'd moved out. But they found this out the night before. So you have Amos and Bennett living in the house.
5 men were stationed outside the house while Byrne rang the bell. Catherine Farrell, the servant girl, attempted to shut the door, according to Byrne. Sticking their feet into the open door, the IRA ordered a maid to take them to the agents' rooms.
Bennett was in, if you're going into 38 Upper Mount Street, you go up 5 or 6 steps to the Georgian door, you go in, there's a hallway. There are 2 doors on the right hand side. The first one led to a parlour room where Bennett was, that was his bedroom. So
the maid points out that Bennett sleeps in the front parlour and Amos is in the back parlour. So Ennis heads towards the back.
Tom Ennis, who was nominally, he was officially Byrne's commander of his unit, but he was actually placed under Vinnie Byrne's command that day. They were initially going looking for Major Carew, but they only found out that he had changed location the previous day. They didn't know where, but they were soon going to find out. They were also going after Captain George Bennett and Lieutenant Peter Ames.
So the maid had to point out the door is locked. So she points out that the other door will be open. So they go in. The folding doors are open and he's lying on the bed.
Okay.
So they slid this door open very, very quickly and surprised him in his bed. Bennett tried to get a .45 pistol that he had concealed under his pillow,
but the IRA rushed him. Doyle searched under a pillow, removing a Colt .45.
And when he looked at Frank Sauron was one of his drinking buddies, you could say, and he used to pose as Mr. Stanley. That's who Bennett identified Sauron as. Now, not on that morning, because he knew he was obviously someone else and he'd been duped. But this was one of the ways that the intelligence war was played out. Bennett was taken from that room and he was led to, again, when you're in that building, if you look down at the very back, you go down to a very back room, and that's where Lieutenant Ames was staying. Yeah, Lieutenant Ames, he'd been born and raised in the USA. He was 32 years old. He'd moved to England in 1912, but he was acting with the Grenadier Guards, but he was an intelligence officer. While they were bringing Bennett to the back room, outside things started to heat up because there was a British motorcycle dispatch rider, Private Snelling. He'd been driving down Bagot Street and he witnessed some of the stuff that was going on along there, but he knew more than to get involved in it. So he just kept on going. But when he drove into Herbert Street, a couple of the volunteers, Joe Leonard and somebody else, they relieved him of his motorbike at gunpoint. So Private Snelling was running down past number 38 Upper Mount Street and he was taken prisoner outside.
Outside, Michael Lawless is patrolling. And so basically he's keeping cover outside. And he can hear footsteps, running footsteps coming behind them. So he sort of looks over his shoulder and realises it's someone in khaki. So he waits till they're right up on top of him and then pulls the gun on him and sort of says, right, you're under arrest. Cairo stuck his head out the window, goes shouting out what's going on down there, and then spots what's going on. Big gun battle starts. And this is, as this point, then Vinnie Bourne is bringing out Bennett from front room. So next thing, the doorbell goes. The volunteer manning the door has looked towards Vinnie Bourne. Vinnie Bourne has looked at him and gone, well, answer it then.
So yeah, Bennett was taken and reassured that nothing was going to happen to him. He was brought down to the back bedroom. He was ordered to stand on the bed with his back to them, but Ames was now standing on his bed facing the wall. Bennett was told to do likewise.
Byrne prayed, "The Lord have mercy on your souls." A hail of gunfire hit the two agents and they crumpled to the floor.
Ames was hit 3 times in the back by rapid fire. All 3 shots exited through his chest, splattering his bodily tissue and blood all over the wall to his front as he was hurled against it under continuous deafening fire. 2 more rounds hit his right armpit, another his right arm, and finally another his right leg. Bennett was shot twice through the back of the head, 4 times through the back and chest, and twice in the right arm. Both bodies collapsed, mangled in a bloody heap on the bed. The entire room was spattered with blood, bone, tissue and brain.
Cairo was still across the road. They've got to get out of this house now. So that they literally have to fight their way out. And Cairo has actually come down to the doorway as well. So he's firing on them. So Tom Ennis is giving them cover while everyone makes their getaway. And they forgot about Frank Sarah. He was still in the house searching for paperwork.
Frank Sarin found Lieutenant Ames's notebook revealing an intelligence structure similar to the IRA's.
And Tom Ennis had to shout back into him, come on. But as he's got ahead now, he sees Snelling. And because he doesn't really know, he doesn't know about Snelling being brought back in. All he sees is the army, so he fires a shot at him. Snelling runs into one of the rooms, and Ennis and Soren shoot their way out up the road and get away.
Even in Pembroke Street, so much went wrong. What was called, I think it was a well-coordinated bloodbath in 28-29 over Pembroke Street, but they left most of them alive. That wasn't the plan. The 2 houses joined into one with an archway to their left, which was used to access and escape from the area afterwards.
There's a lot of staff officers, and you've got Colonel Woodcock, you've got Montgomery. There is Rudolph Murray and Captain Arjun.
Dalton recounts in his witness statement how the hall door was open and the porter was shaking mats at the step. Dalton had prepared the ground. He had befriended a maid, Maudie, and she helped identify the rooms of the agents Price and Dowling. So
Flanagan knows exactly what rooms he's got to go to, which is on the 3rd floor. But Caroline Woodcock is Colonel Woodcock's wife, and she is sitting at her back window of their rooms, and she sees someone jump over the back of the wall, who is Leo Duffy. She notices he's got a gun, and she warns her husband. So now he runs down the stairs. Jim the Chevalier Doyle holds him up. Woodcock is being held captive, and he's in the hallway. Next thing, he heard the door going behind them, and it's his friend Hugh Montgomery. There's another colonel in the house, and he's shouted out a warning, "Watch out, Montgomery!" And Doyle fired. So Montgomery was slow to react as well, and he got shot twice. Woodcock is lying on the stairs. He's badly injured. He's not dead, Montgomery's wife is there, and she's just staring in disbelief and then screaming the place down. But the thing about Montgomery is he actually worked for General Bryan on the intelligence staff. So they actually did get an intelligence officer, even though he was probably one of the staff officers of it. They had actually got one.
He died of his injuries on 10th of December 1920.
And then, because it's 3 floors of this house, Flanagan and Dalton, they all start heading up to the different rooms. So they go to Dowling's and Price's room.
Meanwhile, Captain Flanagan, Charlie Dalton, George White and former medical student Andy Rooney, employing a plush carpet to soften their footsteps as they ascended the left-hand staircase of number 28, reached their objective, the 3rd floor flat shared by Major Charles Dowling of the Grenadier Guards and Captain Leonard Price of the Royal Engineers. The maid had briefed Dalton of the room location. A knock on the door was followed by Flanagan announcing he had a letter for delivery. Answered in his pyjamas, to be instantaneously overpowered before he had time to react to the sight of the 4 gunmen. Just then, Price, 35 years old, appeared in the doorway of the adjoining bedroom. Several dreadful seconds passed as the revelation of what was now inevitable sank in with both officers. Dalton rummaged through the room for documents. Then, Flanagan fired his .45 caliber semi-automatic. Dowling was hit twice in the chest and died instantly. When one round demolished his heart, his body hurled backwards by the force of the shots, cutting through him, blowing blood, bone and tissue all over the walls and the furniture behind him. One round ricocheted into the ceiling. Price was then hit once in the chest with a similarly horrendous result. Both collapsed, latter gurgling horrifically as his perforated lungs gasped for air while he choked on his own blood. Spent rounds rolled on the wooden floor. Within seconds, Price's spasmodic jerks and twists ceased. His agony subsided. Dalton kept searching the room as Dowling and Price perished until Flanagan, gathering himself, barked at him, "Get the hell out."
We've got Brian Keenley, Captain Brian Keenley side, and he's in his rooms with his wife, Rona. We're on the 2nd floor now. They've come out to investigate what's the shooting and the scream, and he was met by 3 gunmen. The wife sort of realised what was about to happen, Rona, and she sort of jumped in the way and doing this. But by this point, Paddy Flanagan's coming back down the stairs, pushes her out of the way, and fires shots into him. Okay. So now we've got another woman on the scene screaming her head off. So this house is now, because it's starting to become a bloodbath, but there's also the screaming of the women that were just seeing their husbands being shot. There's, you've got Woodcock on the stairs still, and he's in bits. He's got blood coming out, and he's still alive. Caroline Woodcock is sitting in a room, not moving. She knows what's going on. She can hear it all. So she's actually probably gone into a bit of shock. So at the top of the house, you've got Lieutenant Randolph Murray and you've got Captain June, who are on the list. They're intelligence officers. Now June is out. He's actually out on a raid in Inchicore. So quite luckily for him, actually, in this sense. So Murray is captured at the top and he's brought down to the hallway. He knows all the way down those stairs he's gonna die. He's not gonna live.
Yeah.
At the end of this, yeah. So he's put up against the wall in the hallway. 4 or 5 revolvers leveled to him. Some are probably shaken. The house is mayhem. And then, as soon as Flanagan has got all the men together, he orders Murray to be shot. Murray's shot. And then they all make their getaway. She wrote this thing where she says she sort of kept her head high so she couldn't see, because she knows she's got to go and get help. She's got to get help. So she has to come down all the stairs. Remember, they're on the 3rd floor, so everything's happened below because Murray was brought down. And so she described that as like a war scene. Chunks of plaster coming off the wall, out of the walls, blood splattered up, just stepping over people, just lying, women screaming. She went out and summoned help.
Captain Thomas Burke of C Company 2nd Battalion stood at the front door to number 119 Lower Bagot Street. Behind him stood Matty MacDonald, Jack Keating, Jack Foley and Sean Lemass, future teacher. MacDonald nervously joked about the size of the hammer Keating had brought to smash the door in if required. There was, however, no need for it. As soon as they knocked, the maid answered, to be told politely. We have a letter here for Captain Bagalay from Dublin Castle, referring to him as a one-legged man. Bagalay, a 29-year-old prosecuting court-martial officer, had, like auxiliary Captain Hoppy Hardy, lost a leg in the Great War. He had also participated in the killing of Sinn Féin councillor Lynch in September, alongside Captain Anglis and Lieutenant Peel, themselves on this morning's target list. Bagalay's participation, brought to IRA attention by Lily Mernon and Detective Nelligan, sealed his fate. When the maid pointed the way to a first-floor bedroom, Burke, Lemass, MacDonald and Keating made their way up, drawing revolvers as they quietly approached the door. Finding it unlocked after testing it carefully, they quickly swung it open and entered, surprising the man lying in bed before them, before posing the question, Captain Bagalay? That is me, came the reply. MacDonald then asserted, I suppose you know what we came for? Bagalay, fearing the worst, but clinging to hope, responded, I suppose you've come for my guns. MacDonald responded, we came for you. He ordered Bagalay out of bed. When Bagalay then stood, 4 muzzles flashed, sending 4 5-ounce rounds at 500 miles an hour through his forehead, left eye and chest. MacDonald rummaged through the dead man's belongings, seeking whatever documentation he could find, before the 4 palpitating assassins sped downstairs. Teeling was injured in the chaos that erupted in number 22 Lower Mount Street. He was trying to escape out the back with several others, but you had absolute pandemonium going on in that address. Absolute pandemonium.
Tom Keogh and James Slattery and Dave Men of E Company, the second, number 22 Lower Mount Street. Now thereafter, Anglis and Peel.
They had knocked on the door and asked to see Mr. McMahon and another man from the party, who had also asked about Mr. Peel. The maid was told to come along, show us the rooms, none of your nonsense.
Anglis was posing as under the assumed name of Mahon, but they knew who he was.
The maid attempted to alert Anglis by calling out that there were men who wanted to see him. Entering the room, the IRA surprised Anglis and a friend. Keogh opened Anglis's bag and found a Colt A. Webley Scott and a .32 automatic. When asked about his identity, Anglis was evasive. Keogh, looking at Anglis's wallet, declared, "You're a liar."
You had pandemonium going on because while this was happening, a 16-man auxiliary unit, they were dressed in civilian clothes, were passing by on their way down to Kingsbridge train station, and I think it was the maid that shouted out the window that they're shooting people upstairs. So they just assaulted the front of the building. They couldn't get in, the door was slammed shut on them. There was gunfire at the front of the building. They got into number 21, which was next door.
A volunteer on the stairs called out that the auxiliaries were surrounding the house. As they attempted to storm the house, volunteer Billy McLean held the door. But their combined weight began to make the door give. McLean stuck his revolver through the gap and fired on them. Fire was returned and McLean was wounded in the trigger finger. Fire was opened on Anglis and he attempted to crawl under the bed. His friend was left alone. He was not on the list.
So they got Anglis on the first floor and they couldn't get Peel. I mean, Peel barricaded himself in his room just at the last minute. There was 17 shots fired through his door.
It has to be later convinced to come out.
Slattery could hear an object being dragged across the floor inside Peel's room. Slattery was trying to break into the room. Unsuccessfully, they were firing blindly. On Main Street Bridge, Cadets Garnis and Morris had met a patrol. They were wearing civilian clothes and were sent to get reinforcements from Beggar's Bush Barracks. They had never arrived as they ran into Vasey and D Company. When their identities as auxiliaries were established, they were taken to a nearby back garden and shot in the head. The auxiliaries were shooting from the back garden of number 21.
And they opened fire on the escaping volunteers out the back of number 21, one of whom was Frank Keeling.
And what happens is that now the volunteers in there have to try and get out, so they're making breaks for the back, over the back. And this is where Teeling gets shot. So he's actually shot from probably the garden next door.
He was trying to escape over the wall, but he was shot. Two of his comrades got over the wall. Teeling was shot just as he was scaling the wall. He kept trying. Although he was shot in the stomach, he kept trying to fire. Eventually, he just couldn't. But I mean, he was doing his best. He was trying to. I think he reloaded the full ammunition clip with blood all over his hands, but it just got to the point where he just couldn't fire more. So he was taken prisoner. He was going to be killed when General Crozier arrived on scene. He found an auxiliary doing a countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 before he killed him. They stopped him just at the last minute in order that he was to be taken prisoner.
And he knocks the gun away and he goes, you're not doing that, get that man to the hospital.
The idea being presumably that they could get information off him at that point and that he'd eventually be court-martialed and probably hung in any case. Yeah, so Crozier had a personal interest in that particular building, 22 Lower Mount Street, because his daughter and his fiancée had both recently rented rooms in its upper floors. But he said it looked like a bad billet from France during the Great War that had been shot up by French mutineers. Great piece about the 22 Lower Mount Street was the escape out the front. When Tom Keogh and the others realised that they couldn't get out the back. They knew there was all these auxiliaries outside, but they had no way out.
Okay.
There was no way out the back. So they opened up the front door and ran out into the street, guns blazing. And their fire was so effective that they suppressed any fire from the auxiliaries, and they made their escape into Grattan Street, which was just across the road. Tom Keogh dropped his pistol as he did, picked it up and kept on firing. But at the same time as they were escaping out the front of number 22 Lower Mount Street, Vinnie Byrne's unit from number 38 Upper Mount Street were making their way down Stevens's Place, which is a laneway just down the road from 22 Lower Mount Street. And they were rushing across Lower Mount Street at the same time.
Tom Keogh, Dennis Begley, Andy Monaghan and Dinny O'Driscoll managed to fight their way out the front door where they reached their ferry across the River Liffey.
But the irony was that McKee and Clancy, two of the people who had been most pivotal to the operation's actual planning, were already in custody.
Frank Thornton has said in his witness statement, men were asked to do something on that day which was outside the ordinary scope of the soldier. But realising their duty to their country and always being ready to obey orders, all jobs were executed. This Irish Saint Bartholomew is how General Macready described Bloody Sunday, comparing it to the 16th century religious massacre in France. Lloyd George had dismissively said of the men who were shot that they got what they deserved, that they were beaten by counterjumpers. Winston Churchill has also said they were careless fellows who ought to have taken precautions. Michael Collins has said, "My one intention was the destruction of the undesirables who continued to make miserable the lives of ordinary, decent citizens. I have proof enough to assure myself of the atrocities which this gang of spies and informers have committed. If I had a second motive, it was no more than a feeling such as I would have for a dangerous reptile. By their destruction, the very air is made sweeter. For myself, my conscience is clear. There is no crime in detecting in wartime the spy and the informer. They have destroyed without trial. I have paid them back in their own coin."